Again, for those who do not know who I am, my name is Ray Roberts. I am the managing partner of the Academic Partnership. I've been in education for 17 years now, and I am also the interim president of APEA, which is the Association for Professional Educators Abroad. This is a part of our lecture series on Ron Richhart's book, Cultures of Thinking, the 8 forces we need to master pretty much improving schools. We're going to go ahead and, in preparation for this weekend's meeting, we will just review some of the key points that's discussed in Chapter 1. Last week, we really got into Richhart's introduction to the book, and I thought it was important to spend some time talking about Richhart's introduction to the book. So now we're going to dive into Chapter 1. And Chapter 1 is entitled The Purpose and Promise of Schools. That's an interesting title. The Purpose and the Promise of Schools. And I think it's appropriate in following in the tradition of Richhart and how he addresses it in the chapter. We should talk about, or we should ask a question here. And again, I want this to be a dialogue. So just go ahead and chat, put in your chat box. If you want to ring in, let me know if you want to ring in, and we can have a one-on-one conversation. I really want this to be interactive. So if you want to ring in, if you have something you want to say, I can go ahead and call you up on this device here if the technology is working appropriately, and we can have a one-on-one conversation. This is why I like using Vygo here. So if you have something that you want to say, just wave or send a message, and I'll go ahead and call you up, and we can have a discussion about some of the points that I want to talk about. Some of the points, excuse me. Stand by. This is one of the downfalls in this technology is that if somebody rings my phone, it kind of shuts me off for a second. So so just stick with me. Stand by. That means somebody's just ringing me. So let's start off the conversation by asking this question. Do we send our students to school for grades? Is this the reason why we send our students to school? Do we send our students to school to get grades, to get high marks? To get high marks. Is that the reason why we send our students to school? So I'll give you a second to kind of think about that. Do we send our students to school to get high marks, to get grades? Okay, think about that for a second. If you can, just write yes or no. Type in on the message here. Type in on the message on the chat room. Yes, no. So I know everyone's kind of following with me. Do we send our students to school to get high marks? Why, as teachers, now let's look in, and that's from the perspective of a parent. Okay, do we send our students to school to get grades, to get marks, to get full marks, as they say here in the Middle East? All right, that's from the perspective of the teacher. Now let's look at this from the perspective of from the perspective of a parent. Let's look at this from the perspective of a teacher. Why do we teach students? Do we teach students so they can score higher on tests? Is that the reason why we teach students? So they can do well on the quiz, do well on the exam, so they can do well on the SAT, so they can do well on standardized tests, on achievement tests. Is that the purpose of our teaching? And again, I'll give you a second to kind of think about that. Give you a second to kind of think about that. All right. So let's talk about what some thinkers have thought about and have commented on as it relates to these questions. One of the things that we have to understand is that when we look at these questions, and we look at these questions from an intellectual standpoint and from a political standpoint, we have to submit ourselves to the fact that no one agrees on why we send our students to school and why we teach. Because there are so many different motives, there are so many different reasons why people send their students to school, that it's really hard to narrow down. We haven't come up to a consensus as a community on why we send our students to school. To be honest with you, some of us only send our students to school because it is against the law not to, and that's coming from my American mind. That we send students, I'll send the students to school because we don't have any choice. We'll be arrested. Some of us send our students to school as a means of getting out of a bad circumstance. We say that education is the great equalizer, right? That's a famous quote. I cannot think of the individual who I can't, it's slipping my mind who made that quote. But education is the great equalizer, right? So some people send their students to school so they can get a higher ranking in life, a higher position in life. And that's one of the reasons why America and countries like America are so appealing, is because education can allow someone to rise above their current situation or social status. But is that the reason why we send our students to school? Can we say that's the consensus? What if you're already rich? What if you're already wealthy? Why are you sending your student to school? Why are you sending your child to school? Your children to school? And because of these different perspectives and these different motivations, it's really hard to kind of narrow down why we send our students to school. No one agrees on this. What is the purpose? But one of the things that we have to submit to, and we have to, if we want to move beyond what we are currently doing, which we have to submit again to the fact that in many countries, the way that we are teaching, including America, and I was offered even including the UK, the way that we are teaching is not the best way to go about the business of teaching. We can most definitely improve. There are things that we can do to make teaching and learning better and more efficient and more effective. So many people who are very smart and who have done a lot of research on this believe that as long as we continue to focus on test scores, we will neglect the opportunity to neglect and ignore the opportunities to focus on or refocus on what really matters in education. And that idea comes from many people, one of which is Elliot Eisner. He makes the point that as long as we continue to focus on test scores, we will continue to do poorly in educating our children. I mean, bottom line. Right now, there's a heavy emphasis on the score because it makes it measurable. We can say, well, the teacher's doing the right thing or the teacher's doing the wrong thing. The student's on task, the student's off task, the student's on level. So in essence, what we're trying to do is objectify something that's very subjective. Okay. What matters is what we say to each other in this regard. And I think this is a very important point when we talk about the cultures of thinking. It really matters what we actually say to one another. Okay, what are we actually saying to one another in this regard? right now in many schools there's a disconnect because everyone has a different motive on why they send their students to school, and the teachers have different motives of why they're teaching, and administrators have different motives of why they're leading, and politicians have different motives of why they are implementing policy. We must begin, if we're going to talk about the culture of thinking, we must begin at the point in which we have to regard each other's as equals when we sit and talk about this. And we must listen, and we must not do what we typically do when there are political or social issues, and that is talk instead of listen to one another and humble ourselves to one another. We have to focus our conversation on what matters. And what matters is what our expectations are, or what do we expect to change. This conversation would shape not only what we teach and how we teach, but the whole society at large, the entire society at large. But we must start at the point in which we respect each other's opinions, so we can come to a consensus, because a consensus is important. Because in my opinion, and in the opinion of many other people, we must have a shared vision. So let's ask another question here. Let's ask another question. What do you want your children to be like as adults? So we can look at that from the perspective of a parent. What do you want your children to be like as an adult? And as you think about the question, when I say your children, I'm not talking about the children that you have in your homes and that you're responsible for. I'm talking about every child in your child's school. And the same thing applies to teachers. What do you want the students to look like as adults, to be like as adults, to act like as adults? What are your expectations of them? So take a moment, think about that idea for 1 second. I'll give you a second to think about that. So in Rich Hart's book, he says that he asks this question often as he tours the world talking about the cultures of thinking, and some of the answers he gets when he's in these talks from parents and teachers and administrators and stakeholders and other stakeholders are, people want the students to be curious and inquisitive and creative and empathetic and problem solvers and risk takers and innovators. This is what we want our students to be. So I have another question for you. If we want our students to be curious, inquisitive, creative, empathetic, and problem solvers, if we want them to be all these things, then I'll take another second to really think about whether we are promoting that action or promoting those processes or those dispositions in our current schools, in our teaching, and in our culture, and in our climate in our schools. So take a couple of seconds just to think about that. While we do that, I'm going to pause because I have someone continue to call me. Stand by for a second. I think I lost the signal for a second here. I think I lost the signal. So I'll try to let people get back on here. I think I lost the signal. So where we stopped off was we asked the question of, if we expect students to be curious, inquisitive, creative, empathetic, problem solvers, and risk takers, are we promoting those processes in our teaching and in our schools? So that's something to think about. So now we have to ask ourselves another question. What do employers want? All right? Because a big part of what we consider when we take our students when we send our students to school is, preparing them for the workforce, preparing them to be workers of some type, hopefully owners, but in any regard, even owners are workers. Here's what, based on research, many employers said they're looking for as it relates to the type of qualities they expect, or the type of, what type of qualities they want out of their workforce. They want the professionalism, they want work ethic, they want collaboration, communication skills being one of the top, ethics, social responsibility, critical thinking, another on top of the list, problem solvers, the ability to analyze information. They want workers to be curious, and they want workers to be imaginative. Okay, so they want work ethic, collaboration, communication skills, ethics. The person have a sense of ethics, social responsibility, critical thinking, problem solvers, analytical abilities, curious, and imagination. So now I'm going to ask the same question again. As a teacher, are we promoting that in our learning, in our teaching rather? As leaders, are we maintaining that type of environment to make sure that when we finish with that student at the end of the year, at the end of the semester, at the end of their time with us, have we instilled in that student, in those students, a student who's able to communicate well, critically think, a student who has imagination, a student who's socially responsible, a student who can work collaboratively? What are we doing? What are you currently doing in your schools to promote this? So this is, and we have to ask ourselves, are we creating that type of person? Are we creating that type of person? Here's another thing to think about. If you look back at your vision, your school's vision statements, would your school's vision statements be reflective of that? Now notice in all of the dispositions that are listed that parents and teachers were looking for, and the dispositions that I mentioned that employers are looking for, none of them centered around remembering. None of them centered around remembering. None of them centered around reading comprehension. Okay. Now here's something interesting that the employers found that was deficient. Employers found that students' ability to write was one of the most deficient qualities that employers had, or the quality that was most deficient that employers had in their current workforce. And that was 80.9% of employers felt that their employees lacked effective written communication skills. Okay. That's what most employers. Now ask yourself, are you giving your students ample time, ample opportunities to write? Are you giving them ample opportunity to write? Okay. What are you focusing most on in your teaching and learning? Does every unit end with some type of opportunity for the student to express themselves in the written format? Also, and this is very interesting, because writing is actually the hardest thing for anyone to do in any language. It's very hard to take brain brain language, translate that brain language into language, what we call language, communicative language, and then translate that communicative language into the creation of something tangible as a writing product. That's an extremely hard thing to do for anyone. This is why when you want to get a master's degree, you have to write a thesis in most cases. If you want to get a PhD, you have to write a dissertation. Why? Because to communicate the observations and communicate your research and communicate your thoughts and your feelings is a very difficult process that most people are not able to do. And the reason why most people are not able to do these processes is because in our cultures, in our intellectual cultures, in our schools, we really don't focus a lot of time and we don't put a lot of effort into writing. This is something to think about. Also, employers found these other skills or capabilities as deficient. Leadership, professionalism, critical thinking, foreign languages, that's in the American context, self-direction, creativity, mathematics, and oral communication skills. I'm going to read those again. These are what currently employers find as capabilities, dispositions, skill sets that are deficient, along with written communications: leadership, professionalism, critical thinking, foreign languages, self-direction, creativity, mathematics, and oral communication. So then I pose this question to you again. I pose the same question again. What are we doing in our classrooms, in our schools, to promote these things, to promote these dispositions, to promote these skill sets, these capabilities of our students? Here's something interesting. So in developed nations, it seems like we're sliding away from, this culture of thinking and creating a student that is universal, right? That is a Renaissance person, right? But in developing Asian nations, they seem like they're getting it. Here's something from chapter 1 that Rich Hart notes, is that the Singapore Minister of Education noted that the top priority in education is to develop a willingness to keep learning and an ability to experiment, innovate, and take risk. I think that's very interesting. All right? So that's their vision in Singaporean schools, is the willingness to keep learning and an ability to experiment and innovate and take risks. And then in China, they had a council that's talking about what they envision their students to be. And it says their vision is to emphasize showing students' creativity and practical abilities over instilling in the ability to achieve high test scores and recite root knowledge. I think that was very interesting from the Asian community. I think they understood that just remembering and just scoring high on tests are not enough to thrive in the 21st century. Scoring high on tests, and we know that in many Asian cultures, there's high emphasis on doing very well on tests. And that has been the case, and that has been the mode of operation for many Asian cultures for a very long time. And I think they finally got it that, hey, look, scoring high on a test is just not enough. That being creative, having the ability to create things, being a risk taker, being skeptical, being healthy, having a healthy skepticism, are all great qualities to have as it relates to being what? The culture of thinking. So here's some other characteristics or dispositions that people are looking forward to the 21st century, because the students that we now teach are 21st century students. We are in the 21st century with 17 years inside of the 21st century. So here's some other dispositions: curiosity, open-mindedness, being strategic, healthy skepticism, I just mentioned that, being a truth seeker. I think being a truth seeker is very, very important to the millennials, very important to the Generation Zers. All right, being socially responsible, finding the truth is very important to this generation. It matters to them, and we see this in the type of businesses they patronize, and the type of businesses they invest in, and the type of businesses they adore. Okay, so for millennials and Generation Zers, this idea of truth seeking is very important. And the other disposition or ability is being metacognitive. If we look at IB programs throughout the world, IB, what's interesting about IB and what's very appealing about IB is that they seek students who are going to be inquirers and thinkers and communicators and risk takers and open-minded, reflective, well-balanced, caring, principled, knowledgeable. So these are the capabilities that the IB program, which is a very popular program in many international schools throughout the world, they are envisioning a student who have those type of capabilities. Moreover, schools are now centering around students being reflective and resourceful and having an understanding of reciprocity and collaboration, and students being resilient. So I ask you, in your schools, are you creating a student who at the end of their experience with you, they have a little resilience inside of them? They have a little idea of what reciprocity is. Are your schools promoting such capabilities? It's just not enough to know the content, ladies and gentlemen. I know we have Common Core, I know we have standards, but the content are a means to an end. The end of these dispositions that we just talked about. It's not, your students are not going to remember the content. They're not. They're going to remember dispositions. And furthermore, in the age of access, in the knowledge age, they don't need to remember this stuff, because they can go on a tablet and figure it out. They can go on their phones and Google it. We have access to information that we didn't have 20 years ago, 10 years ago, when I was in school, when I was in high school 30 years ago. I had to actually go to the library to do research because we didn't have internet. Really, no one had a personal computer in their homes when I was in high school. And if you did, you were very rich, and the personal computers weren't really that helpful. We didn't have access. We didn't have that same access. Now students have access. So when I was a student, remembering was an important skill. It's just not that important anymore. Remembering content is just not that important anymore, guys, ladies and gentlemen. All the dispositions that I just mentioned are way more important. So what's important? This idea of usable knowledge. This is what the 21st century learner needs. This is what the 21st century learner needs to thrive in this age of access. So then that begs the question of us as people who are supposed to provide students with this usable knowledge is, how do we get to this point? And what do we need to get to this point where we provide students with information that that they really need. So for folks who are already graduated university, I'm 42 years old. I'm going to tell you that in my experience, and I've been working since I was 13 years old. I've been gainfully employed since I was 13 years old. And I'm going to tell you, in all the years that I've been gainfully employed, and most of the jobs I've had in my professional life have been knowledge jobs where I have to use my intellect. No one's asked me what I scored on the SAT. No one's asked me my GPA in university. No one's ever asked me my GPA in high school. No one's ever asked me anything about test scores. I haven't taken a test. I haven't taken tests since college. I haven't taken extreme tests since my grad program. In the real world, you don't take those type of tests. In the real world, the tests are the dispositions. I ask you, think about this for a second. How much information have you used from your university experience? Go ahead and, if you would like, comment in the box. How much information have you used in your university experience? How much, if you didn't go to university, how much of that information did you use in your high school experience? How much of that information from high school did you use? Ahmed, you're right. Very, very little. Very, very little. And here's the interesting thing, Ahmed. The information the skills that you did use, ask yourself, the skills that you are using now, that you dealt with in high school, that you dealt with in university, how much time was dedicated to those skills in university and high school? How much time was dedicated to those skills? I know for me, very little. Especially in high school. Writing, in high school, I wrote very little. However, that's a skill that is very much needed. You have to write emails now. You have to use social media to write now. And your ability to communicate well in the written format is the test. And it's a test that you take every day. Making sure that email is concise, is clear and concise. Whether you're practicing cohesion and coherence in your writing, so people understand and get the point very quickly. So we have to ask ourselves, are we doing these things in our teaching, in our learning environments? How are you promoting these dispositions in your current learning environments? What are you doing to make sure that the student has usable knowledge? Knowledge that is important and compulsory for the 21st century and not antiquated. So I've been using this word dispositions, and in chapter 1, Rich Hart takes the time to really explain what a disposition is. And I think it's important, and I'm not saying that you guys are not smart. I know you know what a disposition is, but I think it's important to really talk about dispositions for a second. And Rich Hart says dispositions are enduring characteristics or traits of a person that serves to motivate behavior. So everyone who knows me in my teaching training program, I promote this idea of contextualization and personalization. And the reason why I promote these ideas and these concepts in your teaching is, number one, it motivates your student because it speaks to their dispositions. What the last teacher instilled in that student, what the previous teachers instilled in that student, what the parents instilled in that student, what the community, the culture, the religion instilled in that student, or those students you're teaching. So it's very, very important that we personalize and we conceptualize ideas and concepts for students so they can connect them. Ted Sizer calls dispositions the residues or the residuals of education. The residue of education. So basically what this means is after the student has taken your quiz, after they have taken your test, after they have taken your exam, it's what they really know. Because you know, Ahmed, you know, and everyone else, and the Romies out there, you know, after you take a test, after you take a quiz, especially after you take the exam, you brain dump. You forget all that information. That information is not stored in your frontal cortex. That information is stored in a non-thinking part of your brain. It's only there to remember, to regurgitate, so you can pass the test. And then as soon as you finish that test, you forget about it. Think about the last time you took a course or a class, and the driving force was the test. So you can get a license, or you can get a job, or you can get whatever, or you can get your diploma. Do you still remember that information? Now think about that teacher who spoke to your dispositions, who spoke to you, who spoke to what your knowledge was, who started from some things that you knew about and things that you were interested about. I bet you still remember those lessons from that teacher. So what we're really looking for as educators is going after the residue of learning. The problem with going after this is that you can't teach dispositions directly. Dispositions cannot be taught directly. Dispositions are nurtured. They're nurtured over time. They're cared for. They're developed. You can't test the disposition. You can see it more. We get those in your teaching. You ever get those little bumpy moments? Those little moments where you just feel like, oh my, they're getting it. You don't ever get those bumpy moments because a student got 100 on a quiz. You say, well, that's what they're supposed to do. They remember it. But when a student is able to connect information and take something they learned from a previous class and to take something that you instilled in them and they create it and they act a certain way, and you didn't necessarily teach that, but you taught something indirectly concerning that based on a story that you read or a math problem that you did, and you see the student collaborate, you see the student create, you see the student reciprocate, you see the student do something that's very mature, that's very adultish. That's true teaching. That's the residue of learning, of teaching. And this is what we're going after in our teaching. This is the culture of thinking. It's not the content, ladies and gentlemen. It is not the content. It's not the subject-verb agreement. Trust me, it is not. It's that student's leadership ability. Because if that student is a great leader, he's gonna have a computer program that's gonna fix the subject-verb agreement issues for him. And I'm not, listen, don't get me wrong. I'm not discounting grammar. I'm not discounting mechanics. I'm not discounting content. Content is a means to a destination, but the destination is this universal thinker. Is this thinker who cares about the world at large? This empathetic person, this caring person, the person who's responsible not only for himself and his family, but his entire community. This is what we're going after, and that cannot be tested. You can't give somebody an exam on that. There's a show that comes on television, I think on NBC or ABC, I can't remember. It's called What Would You Do? What Would You Do? I don't know if anyone has seen that show. I think you can watch it on YouTube, or if you have Hulu, I think it comes on Hulu or maybe even Netflix. It's called What Would You Do? And the camera is like a hidden camera show, but it's not a comedy. It's actually real life. And what they do is they put people in scenarios where a person is doing something that may not be the best for society. And then it challenges, it sees whether, and these are actors obviously, and it sees whether the normal people who are coming into this framework, who's coming into the scene, how the normal people will respond, how the non-actors will respond. It's called What Would You Do? And often, what we find in that show is that many people just walk by. Many people just kind of just let a person be abused, let someone's rights be violated. You know, don't say anything. And it's not because they're bad people, it's because they don't know what to do, because they haven't worked on their dispositions. In every show, there's always one person who has that disposition that makes us say there is some humanity. Our job as teachers is to promote humanity. As teachers, we have to enculture. As schools, we have to create an environment which promotes the enculturing of the universal thinker, of the intellectual thinker, of the responsible thinker. Teachers must take that mantle. They must take that responsibility. They must carry that burden. This is why we're so important. Because if we do not start promoting dispositions, guys, ladies and gentlemen, if we do not start promoting dispositions, computers, technology will take our jobs. Artificial intelligence will take our jobs. And teaching as you know it will change. It's going to change anyway. Technology will drastically change how we do our work. But we have a living chance. We have a fighting chance. And we can promote the ideas of humanity through through the nurturing and the development of dispositions. The famous Lev Vygotsky says, children grow into the intellectual life of those around them. Children grow into the intellectual life of those around them. So if that's the case, what are we doing in our schools? What is the culture that we're creating in our schools? Are you modeling good disposition? Are you smiling? Are you being empathetic? Are you encouraging resilience? Are you promoting global citizenship? Do you take time for those teachable moments when a student is off task from an humanity standpoint? Or do you let pacing get in the way? Do you say, we have to go page 1, page 2, page 3? This is our value in the classroom, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to wrap this up because we're getting close to the time. I'm going to end this by saying this. Culture, if we really want to deal with dispositions, culture is about repetition. It's about repetition and routine. And this is one of the forces that Ron Richhart talks about in his book. It's about repetition and routine. All those administrators out there listening to me, all those teachers out there listening to me, if you want to make your school better, create a system. Create a system of thinking, a system of intellect that is based around routine. Inspect what you expect. Inspect what you expect. Inspect what you expect. Because our students are a reflection of us. Every student that you have is a little bit of you inside of them when they leave you. A little bit of it. A lot of their parents, a lot of their neighborhood, a lot of their culture, but a little bit of you that is ingrained in them, that is instilled in them. when you deal with their disposition. So this means that relationships are extremely important when we're talking about a culture of thinking. Relationships become extremely, extremely important. In these relationships, the stakeholders in the schools must get rid of these titles, these hierarchical titles. I'm the deputy general, and I'm the head of the department, and I'm the coordinator. Who cares? Who cares if you're a coordinator? Who cares that you're the deputy? Do da da dee da dee da 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 da. Who cares? What you are is a stakeholder in the school that is responsible for making sure the student is a lifelong learner, making sure the student is resilient. So, and I'm not saying that titles are not important, but what I'm saying is that the responsibility that title brings is important, and that you should have structure inside of a system. You should have structure. However, you should not walk around with that title. You should walk around humble. Humble. Our humbleness allows us to listen to each other, because everyone has a good idea. The janitor, the custodian has a good idea. The guy and the lady who brings you tea and coffee has a great idea. Parents have great ideas. And guess what? Guess who has the greatest idea? Students. Students have the greatest ideas. Students can tell you what they want to know and what they need to know, because they're more in tune in the 21st century than we will ever be. I'm a 20th century guy. I was born in the 20th century. A lot of my perspectives are 20th century perspectives. I have to work hard to be a 21st century person, because my parents instilled in me 20th century thinking. Many of your parents instilled in you 20th century thinking. So allow your 21st century students to lead and guide the vision of schools. This is the only way we create self-efficacy. This is the only way we create lifelong learners, is when we allow them to take charge. We allow them to take the lead. We allow the students to say, this is what I want to learn, because I know it's important for my generation. I know it's important when I lead this country, when I lead this planet. So we have to humble ourselves. We have to get rid of those titles, and look at ourselves as workers for our students. Workers who are responsible in making sure the students are responsible for their learning. I'm going to end here because I can talk all night. Please, if you find what I'm saying is very helpful, insightful, interesting, and you agree or disagree with it, please friend me on Vygo. Please go ahead and friend me. I try to do a Vygo talk once a week, and I also do talks on YouTube once a week. My handle is 97 Spiders. Thank everyone. I look forward to seeing everyone this Saturday at our October PIA meeting. And that is 1 to 3 at Dome International School, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Be someone's champion. Ray Roberts, I'm out.